In 1930, we arrived in New York's Harlem community. I was 13 years of age. It was a very vital, very energetic, very alive community. I used to hear, especially in Philadelphia, my parents would talk about another family arriving. And people who had been there a year or so before would give them clothes, take clothes to them, take coals to them, for the furnace and things of that sort. So I grew up very conscious of people moving.
I think I want to move my seat. Got me. Nope. This is better. Nice seat up front. Can enjoy the view. So you just saw me moving around from one place to another, and I moved to different places. And you might be thinking, well, why? Why did he move? Well, there are a lot of reasons that people might move from one place to another. In this video, I am going to talk about moving around. You can think of it as a push or a pull. Here's what I mean by that. Sometimes you are pushed away from a place that you're already at, and you're forced to move around. You're forced to move away. For example, if a place is not safe, not being able to stay safe pushes you away from that place and causes you to want to leave or move away. Other times, there's something at the other place that you like, and it pulls your attention. For example, a job or education or your friends. Think about the last time your friends were someplace that you wanted to be. I'm sure you begged your parents to be there, right? That's called a pull. There's something there that you're interested in. So there are a lot of reasons why a person might move around. But what I'm going to talk to you about in this video today is not just one person, not why I'm moving around, but I'm going to talk about a bunch of people moving at the same time. So between the year of 1910 and 1970, large populations of African Americans started to move around. So another word for moving from one place to another is called migration. So here's what I want you guys to do. Right now, wherever you're sitting or standing, I want you to move to a different spot right now. So go ahead and move. Yeah. So right now, you're migrating. That's an example of migration. There are so many black people moving from one place to another that they actually called it the Great Migration. So during the Great Migration, African Americans moved from southern cities and states to cities and states in the north, in the west, and in the eastern parts of the United States. Before the Great Migration, nearly all black people in America lived in the South. And when I say almost all, I'm not kidding. Nearly 90% of black people lived in southern states like Texas, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, and a few others. Maybe 10 states total. Now, if you compare that to now, black people live in every state in America, all 50. But during the Great Migration, there were some cities and states that African Americans moved to, like Chicago, Pennsylvania, New York, Detroit, maybe even Grand Rapids, that black people believe that it would help them have a better life. So the Great Migration was between 1910 and 1970. That was such a long time ago, wasn't it? Or was it not?
I think it depends on how you look at it from a family perspective. I know I'm the youngest of 8, and there's a huge difference between my oldest sibling and myself. I know it impacted us because my dad was part of that initial Great Migration. Well, not necessarily initial, but right after World War II. I mean, he served in the war. He was from North Carolina, and the racism that he was facing was on a completely different level. So he actually migrated to Detroit, where he met my mom. So if not for him migrating from North Carolina to Detroit, I probably never would have been born.
So for our viewers out there, we have a lot of viewers right now that are about 9, 10 years old, and just so that they can understand the time frame, because obviously you're talking about your dad, and so for them, it could be their grandparents or your great-grandparents. So I want to encourage you to talk to your grandparents, maybe your great-grandparents, and ask them about the Great Migration because they were the ones who experienced it. So it really wasn't that long ago, although it may seem like it. Living in the South was so very difficult for Black people during that time. There were concerns about safety and being able to feed your family. So back then, Black people only made about 75 cents per day. Imagine that. How much money do you have in your pocket right now? Imagine that. You have more money than what they could have each day to feed their families. But think about this. In the northern cities, or in the western cities, or in the eastern cities, Black people could earn up to $5 a day. That was a huge difference. And so, because of the opportunities, that began the Great Migration. Unfortunately, moving to northern and western cities were not all positive. Black people still face prejudices and discrimination in those new places. However, it was not nearly as harsh as they had experienced in the South. Black people were so desperate for safety and economic opportunities that they packed everything that they could and traveled hundreds of miles in hopes of a better life. Now, think about a time when you had to move or your family had to move. What were some of the things that you packed up and that you brought with you? Yeah, think about it. Things like clothes, maybe your music, maybe your video games, your knowledge, you brought your religion with you, whatever skills you had, your furniture, your clothes, all of these things you'll pack up and you'll bring with you to this new place.
For me, my family went to California. They came from Alabama, Kentucky, and they were in the hair business. So they purchased properties in San Francisco, and we had beauty salons all over the city.
Well, think about this. Thousands of Black families moved to these new areas and they brought these things with them. And that definitely had an impact on the way of life in those areas. So the Great Migration created these huge hubs or spaces where a Black culture could thrive. In places like New York, again in Detroit, and maybe even here in your hometown, Grand Rapids, Black people brought their music with them. They brought art, they brought literature with them. And those things were very popular. So one of the things that came out of the Great Migration was this intense focus or a more appreciative attitude towards things that were a part of Black culture. Again, the things that they brought with them from the South, their literature, their knowledge, their art, all of those things found their way into these communities that were full of African Americans. And so with that came a greater appreciation for the things that we held near and dear to our culture, and art being one of them. And African Americans, because of the Great Migration, began to take control of their lives and their identity and their own destinies. So although things were not perfect in the northern cities, in the eastern cities, or in the western cities, but these places did provide an opportunity that they otherwise might not have had. And there you have the Great Migration.